Capitalization of current earned income, the mass appraisal DOF conducts for commercial properties is New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 1, Initial Recommendations 63, Executive Summary. New York City is home to a mosaic of real property, from the iconic skyscrapers that shape its skyline to the varied domiciles that house its 8.6 million residents, the residential dwellings, office buildings, and small business corridors that line its streets contribute to New York's diversity of industry, rich culture, and vibrancy of its neighborhoods, though the topography of the city's properties may vary. From neighborhood to neighborhood, there is one common thread that stitches most of them together: the obligation to pay property taxes. While this connection may bind properties together at an elemental level, commonalities beyond that can be quite limited. A close look at New York City's property tax system will show that there can be vast differences in how properties are classified, valued, and assessed, lending credence to the widely held characterization that the system is overly complex, opaque, and arcane. The real property tax is an integral part of local government budgets. Revenues derived from them help fund essential public services such as education, public safety, infrastructure, and much more. In New York City, the property tax comprises approximately 45% of the city's tax revenue, enabling the delivery of top-notch services to those who live, work, and visit the city. As a result, it is difficult to overstate the importance of the property tax, but the impact on those who bear the responsibility of paying it must not be overlooked. Any property tax system should be fair, predictable, and transparent, and should not induce displacement among long-term homeowners and renters from the neighborhoods they've called home. These principles should be at the center of any system's design, but this seemingly universal sentiment is constrained by a fundamental challenge: achieving a delicate balance between sustaining and enhancing essential government services that city residents expect while ensuring that the tax burden does not place an enormous strain on household budgets. Designing the ideal property tax system has confounded public officials at all levels and branches of government. For decades, indeed, in the lead up to the enactment of today's system, property tax reform engendered fierce debate among policymakers as they struggled with designing a system that would not saddle homeowners with exorbitant tax bills. The long road to property tax reform, which followed the foundational 1975 Court of Appeals decision, Hellerstein v. Assessor of the Town of Islip, that essentially struck down the use of fractional assessments in valuing properties, took 6 years and was marked by legislative extensions, creation of a temporary legislative commission to study reform proposals, a gubernatorial veto of reform legislation, and an override of that veto. What emerged from the tumultuous process was today's system, made up of 4 property classes with market valuation restrictions. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 9, different assessment ratios, year-over-year caps in growth, transition mechanisms, a complicated class share system, and more. The system was not a panacea. In fact, just 1 decade after its enactment, it was criticized for causing inequities among property owners. In establishing the New York City Real Property Tax Reform Commission in 1993, the last government-appointed commission to study New York City's property tax system, then Mayor David Dinkins spoke of the need for property tax reform, saying that, after a decade of experience, a number of profound problems are visible. The commission cited many issues that plagued the SYS. e.g., the treatment of coop and condominium owners relative to owners of 1-3 family homes. The commission's report was issued on December 30, 1993, very close to the official start of a new mayoral administration. While the 1993 Commission's work did not trigger a wholesale reform of the system, it is believed to have aided in the enactment of the Cooperative and Condominium Property Tax Abatement Program, Coop Condo Tax Abatement, in 1996, with no significant reform effort underway. The discrepancies persisted and only became more pronounced with the passage of time. Today, the chorus of voices decrying the system as inequitable has multiplied. While there is little debate over the need for reform, there is considerable debate about the extent to which the system unfairly treats certain property classes, and properties within those classes, as well as the prescriptive remedies needed to rationalize the system. On May 31, 2018, Mayor Bill de Blasio and City Council Speaker Corey Johnson established the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform. The Commission, in order to make the system simpler, clearer, and fairer, while ensuring that there is no reduction in revenue used to fund essential city services, the Commission's mandate was to evaluate all aspects of the property system, including, but not limited to, the property tax classification system, methods of determining property market values and assessments, treatment of property value increases, relief for low-income and senior homeowners, and the calculation of tax rates. In empaneling the Commission, Mayor de Blasio and Speaker Johnson sought to assemble a group of experts with diverse backgrounds who could recommend a comprehensive and thoughtful overhaul of the system. The Commission held 5 public hearings across the city, 3 hearings with invited experts, and 2 public meetings to hear an overview of the current system and the various policy levers to consider while pursuing reform. The feedback received from the public and experts generally centered on the amount of property taxes paid relative to market value, comparisons of property tax bills across neighborhoods, and difficulty with understanding how the system works. Many of the issues highlighted by those who testified could be traced back to flaws in current law, including the undervaluation of some coops and condominiums as a result of state law restrictions that require that they be valued as if they were rental properties, rather than based on comparable sales, the assessed value growth caps that have caused distortions in the effective tax rates, taxes paid per $100 of sales-based market value, of 1-3 family homes. Properties that have experienced significant depreciation have lower effective tax rates than new homes or homes whose value has remained relatively flat. The Commission spent more than a year analyzing data and examining various reform models that comport with its mandate. Based on the extensive deliberations of Commission members, ex officio members, and staff, the Commission is advancing initial recommendations in this preliminary report that address inequities in the system, and provide the Commission's appointing authorities and policymakers with a roadmap to reform. 10 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. The Commission reached consensus on 10 initial recommendations. 1. The Commission recommends moving coops, condominiums, and rental buildings with up to 10 units into a new residential class along with 1-3 family homes. The property tax system would continue to consist of 4 classes of property: residential, large rentals, utilities, and commercial. 2. The Commission recommends using a sales-based methodology to value all properties in the residential class. 3. The Commission recommends assessing every property in the residential class at its full market value. 4. The Commission recommends that annual market value changes in the new residential class be phased in over 5 years at a rate of 20% per year, and that assessed value growth caps should be eliminated. 5. The Commission recommends creating a partial homestead exemption for primary resident owners with income below a certain threshold. The exemption would be available to all eligible primary resident owners in the residential class and would replace the current coop condo tax abatement. 6. The Commission recommends creating a circuit breaker within the property tax system to lower the property tax burden on low-income primary resident owners, based on the ratio of property tax paid to income. 7. The Commission recommends replacing the current class share system with a system that prioritizes predictable and transparent tax rates for property owners. The new system would freeze the relationship of tax rates among the tax classes for 5-year periods, after which time the city would conduct a mandated study to analyze if adjustments need to be made to maintain consensus. 10C in the share of taxes relative to fair market value borne by each tax class. 8. The Commission recommends that current valuation methods should be maintained for properties not in the new residential class, rental buildings with more than 10 units, utilities, and commercial. 9. The Commission recommends a gradual transition to the new system for current owners, with an immediate transition into the new system whenever a property in the new residential class is sold. 10. The Commission recommends instituting comprehensive reviews of the property tax system every 10 years. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 11. Further details on the Commission's recommendations can be found in the main body of New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 11. Further details on the Commission's recommendations can be found in the main body of this report. This is a preliminary report and a final report will follow. This preliminary report is presented as a framework for reform and is intended to elicit comments from the general public and all stakeholders so that a set of final recommendations can be issued. To that end, the Commission will hold another round of hearings, one in each borough, to solicit feedback on the contents of this preliminary report. The hearing schedule is being developed and, once finalized, will be available on the Commission website at this URL. The Commission encourages members of the public to attend the hearings and present their opinions, as the Commission continues to engage the public for comment on the 10 initial recommendations outlined in this report. It will also be meeting regularly to reach consensus on outstanding issues and additional items that will be raised through the stakeholder engagement and public hearing processes. For example, the Commission recognizes that the incidence of the property tax on renters is a complex issue, and experts convened at public hearings sponsored by the Commission confirmed that it is hard to systematically measure and more work needs to be done. Additional issues that the Commission will discuss include, but are not limited to, ending fractional assessments for properties not in the new residential class, the length of the period for transitioning to the new system, and defining the parameters of the targeted owner relief programs. Central to this next phase of the Commission's work will be to address these issues within the mandate to ensure that reform does not result in a reduction in revenue. For almost 40 years, New York City's property tax system has dictated how myriad properties are taxed, and its effects, for better or worse, have affected all corners of the city. The city's elected leadership determined that it was time for a serious review. The Commission has undertaken that review with diligence, thoughtfulness, and creativity and presents this preliminary report to guide serious discussions on how best to reform the system. 12. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 13. 14. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. Introduction. 16. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. Hearings and meetings. The Commission held its first public meeting on July 20, 2018. At that meeting, the Department of Finance provided a primer about the current property tax system. Point 2. The second meeting, held on September 4, 2018, featured a presentation from the City Council Finance Division team on the levers that can be used to reform the system. 3. The Commission then held a series of public hearings in each borough to solicit specific feedback about the challenges taxpayers face in neighborhoods across the city. The first such hearing was held on Staten Island on September 27, 20,184, followed by Queens on October 3, 20,185, the Bronx on October 11, 20,186, Brooklyn on October 15, 20,187, and Manhattan on October 23, 20,188. The Commission then convened hearings of experts on a variety of subjects that Commission members wanted to hear more about: who pays the property tax, and how the property tax impacts land and housing prices and the rent charged to tenants living in rental properties. December 13, 2018, available at this URL. 18. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 2. A brief history. Under New York's municipal home rule structure, the state retains authority of New York City's over major changes in taxation for New York City. Point 9. This section provides a short property tax system history. New York City property tax system, and a condensed summary of the important changes that have occurred throughout the years 1940s to 1960s. New York State Real Property Tax Law, RPTL, which currently governs how property taxes are administered in New York State, first became effective in 1959. Prior to that, property tax administration was controlled by a variety of boards, as well as federal, state, and local assessment practices. The primary objective of the RPTL was to consolidate all the general laws relating to real property, assessment and taxation into a single law, and it served as a simplified and chronological language upon which future amendments were based. 10. RPTL also governs most methods by which New York City is allowed to administer and collect property taxes. In New York City, specifically, there was the major housing shortage following World War II. This shortage occurred both because housing production had stalled during the war in order to redirect materials and labor to the war effort, and many soldiers returning from the front sought homes in the city. 11 To ease the burden the shortage was imposing on homeowners, who were seeing the values of their properties, and thus their taxes, rise sharply, the city followed a policy of ignoring increases in the market values of those homes. 12 To ease the burden on renters, the city readopted rent control policies during World War II that had first been adopted in 1920, but had expired in 1929. 13 As the shortage eased in the late 1940s and 1950s, the city faced another crisis, the flight of the middle class to the suburbs. 14 To encourage homeowners to remain in the city, New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 19 froze their assessments, reasoning in part that the policy achieved parity between homeowners and renters still protected by rent control. 15 In 1960, the state legislature reconstituted the State Board of Equalization and Assessment as a permanent agency within the Office for Local Government. 16 Known today as the New York State Office of Real Property Tax Services, ORPTS, the office determines final special franchise values and state equalization rates, which are ratios of assessed value over the market value of real property. 17 The equalization rates serve as a measure of a municipality's level of assessment, which determines how school district or county taxes are distributed. Distributing the tax burden based on assessed values would be incorrect when assessed values relate differently to market value. Equalization rates are used to translate assessed values into market values for the purpose of distributing the tax levy. 18 1970s tax reform and its aftermath. Like New York City, many jurisdictions in New York State assessed property values at a fraction of their market value, and the practice led to inequities in many towns and cities across the state. 19 In 1974, Jerome and Pauline Hellerstein sued the town of Islip, arguing that fractional assessments violated Section 306 of the RPTL 20, which mandated that all real property be assessed at full market value. In 1975, New York's Court of Appeals agreed with the plaintiffs, finding that the fractional assessment system would lead to, and mask significant inequities. Key percentage of undervaluation is rarely a matter of common knowledge, so that it is extremely difficult to ascertain whether there is uniformity in the proportion or whether through incompetence, favoritism, or corruption of the assessors, some portions of the tax-paying body are bearing the others' burdens, as between either individuals or local groups. 21 The court acknowledged, however, the fiscal chaos. 22 that might result from the immediate upending of the assessment practice, and required Islip to reassess all of its properties at full value within 36 months, allotting what it saw as a reasonable time period for orderly compliance. The court's decision affected the whole state, however, and the state legislature granted itself a 4-year extension to meet the court's order, as it needed more time to sort out a difficult political situation. In 1977, Governor Hugh Carey created a temporary commission on real property taxation to explore means of protecting homeowners from large tax increases. Legislators understood that the full market value taxation Hellerstein called for was likely to cause political backlash because a state assembly task force that studied the issue in 1979 found that the Hellerstein mandate would double property tax bills for homeowners in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. 23 As homeowners began to voice their concerns, members of the New York Senate and Assembly concluded that the change ordered by the Hellerstein Court was not politically viable. 24 20 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. After granting itself several additional extensions to study the issue, the legislature passed a tax reform bill known as S7000A in 1981, overriding a veto from Governor Hugh Carey, who argued that the bill would result in the continuation of the inequitable, chaotic, and haphazard assessment practices which homeowners have been subjected to for many years. S7000A repealed Section 306 of the RPTL 25 and allowed all municipalities, aside from New York City and municipalities in Nassau County, to continue the fractional assessment practices the court had struck down as violating that section. 26 In New York City and Nassau County, however, S7000A set up 4 distinct classes for 1 to 3 family homes. Class 1, larger residential buildings, both rental and coops and condominiums. Class 2, utility cities Class 3, and commercial property Class 4, and allowed each class to be assessed at different percentages of estimated market value, the two different assessment systems, one for New York City and Nassau County and one for the rest of the state, were the result of a compromise between Governor Carey's desire for full value assessment and the state Senate's aim of making as few changes to assessment practices as possible. S7000A set up a class share system to allocate the tax levy among the classes. The system used 1981 as the base year for the class shares, perpetuating the tax advantage. Class 1 properties accumulated up to that year. 27 The class shares are adjusted each year for changes to each tax class share of market value due to relative market value growth. Shares are further adjusted for physical changes such as new construction, demolition, restoration of properties to the assessment roll, and properties moving from one tax class to another. Additionally, the City Council could increase or decrease the resulting class shares by up to 5%. 28 The City Council used its discretion to favor Class 1, 29. At the same time, it provided City Council discretion on class shares. S7000A required ORPTS to survey market values every 2 years and adjust class shares based on changes in the market value represented by each class. 30 By 1989, ORPTS had completed no surveys and market value shares had remained at their 1981 level, favoring Class 1, which had appreciated faster than the other classes. In 1989, the state legislature put in place the current class share system by setting the base year for the calculation to city fiscal year 1990, essentially preserving the status quo at the time. The annual growth rate of class shares was capped at 5%. The city may request legislative authorization from the state to lower the class share cap below 5%, and the City Council has the discretion to distribute the excess share to other tax classes. To the benefit of Class 1 properties, S7000A capped the growth of assessed values due to market conditions, so-called equalization changes, at no more than 6% in any 1 year, or no more than 20% cumulatively, over any 5 years. 31 S7000A also provided a tax advantage to buildings held in coupon condo form through Section coupon condo form through Section 581 of RPTL, which requires the city to value those properties as if they were rental properties, rather than by looking at the recent New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 21, Sales of Comparable Units. 32 Specifically, Section 581 states, notwithstanding any other provision of law, real property, owned or leased by a coop corporation or on a condominium basis shall be assessed for purposes of this chapter at a sum not exceeding the assessment which would be placed upon such parcel were the parcel not owned or leased by a coop corporation or on a condominium basis. 33. To satisfy Section 581, the New York City Department of Finance (DOF) identifies comparable rental buildings based on factors such as location, amenities, and size. DOF then uses the net rental income of the comparable properties, or gross rental income for smaller buildings in Class 2 to determine the value of coop and condo buildings. In prac. TICE. This statutory requirement results in undervaluation of new and high-priced buildings that lack an appropriate set of comparable rental properties. 34. Asians, the caps are set at no more than 8% over 1 year, or no more than 30% cumulatively over any 5 years. 35. In addition, in 1996, the state legislature created the Coop Condo Tax Abatement, intended to better align taxation of Class 2 buildings held in Coop or condo form with Class 1.36. Currently, this abatement is only available to primary resident owners. 37. In addition to the Coop Condo Tax Abatement, NYS tax law contains a variety of other tax expenditure programs providing tax exemptions and abatements. The purpose of the programs include providing tax relief to property owners based on income, age, disability, and veteran status. 38. They also provide property tax breaks to businesses for economic development and to developers for the development and rehabilitation of multifamily housing. In the early 1990s, assessed value growth caps were enacted for rental buildings of 4 to 10 units and Coop and condo buildings with 2 to 10 units, which apply to equalization changes only, not changes due to physical alter. 22. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. 23. 24. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. The current property tax system calculation overview. To calculate the property tax liability for any given property, the New York City Department of Finance (DOF) undertakes 8 steps. 1. DOF categorizes the property within one of the 4 property classes. 2. DOF estimates the market value as specifically defined under state law (DOF value) of the property. 3. DOF applies assessment ratios to determine assessed value, AV. 4. DOF applies growth caps and phase-ins to the AV to calculate billable AV. 5. DOF subtracts exemptions to arrive at taxable billable AV. 6. DOF multiplies taxable billable AV by the class tax rate to determine the tax liability. 7. DOF calculates the final tax bill by subtracting tax abatements from the tax liability. 39. 8. DOF administers billing and collection. 39. NYCDEPT of Finance Presentation, New York Property Tax System Background, July 20, 2018, available at this URL. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. 25. Step 1. Classification of the property into one of the 4 classes. Class 1 originally consisted of 1-3 family homes, but over time, small condo developments and other property types were added by statute, including some types of mixed-use properties, bungalows and vacant land. 40. Class 2 consists of all other residential properties not in Class 1, such as rental buildings, Coops and condos. Class 3 includes property of regulated utilities and special franchise properties they hold, such as cable television providers that place their equipment on or under city streets. Class 4 consists of all other properties, which range from gas stations and stores, to factories and warehouses, to hotels and office skyscrapers. 41. Table 1 summarizes the distribution of taxable parcels and residential units among the 4 classes. Table 1, Universe of taxable parcels, FY 2019. Tax class property type parcels residential units. 3 family homes 703,206 1,095,061. 2 rental buildings, Coops, condos 670,500 1,921,292. 3 utilities 290. 4 commercial 97,571. Total 1,471,567. Source, New York City Department of Finance, Division of Tax Policy Analytical File. Notes, restricted to taxable billable properties. Class 1 also includes several other small residential property types, excludes Class 2 condos smaller than 100 square feet, e.g., storage units, parking. Vacant land is in Class 1 or Class 4. Class 4 includes some utilities. A parcel is defined as a unit for Coops and as a tax lot for all other property types, with tax lot defined as unique combination of borough, block and lot identifiers, or a BBL. 40 Act of December 3, 1981, ch. 1057, 1981 NY Laws 220, McKinney, codified at Section 1802, Governor's Bill Jacket, p. 31, IBO, 25 years after, Section 7000A, Supra Note at 15. 41. For a detailed definition of tax classes, see NYCDOF Annual Report of the New York City Property Tax, Fiscal Year 2018, Appendix A, https www.nyc.gov/assets/finance/downloads/pdf/reports/property_fi18.pdf 26 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. Step 2. Estimation of DOF value. DOF estimates the value of a property through a variety of generally accepted methods, depending upon the type of property. There are 4 main approaches. 42. 1. Comparable sales determines value based on recent sales of comparable properties. 2. Net income capitalization determines value based on the ratio between a property's current net income and a capitalization rate, which is designed to approximate an investor's expected annual rate of return on an income-producing property. 3. Gross income multiplier determines value based on a multiple of gross income. 4. Cost estimates value using the value of the land plus the cost of constructing the buildings and other improvements on the land, adjusted for depreciation. This approach is used for utilities. The valuation of special franchise property is determined by the New York State Office of Real Property Tax Services, ORPTS. Table 2 summarizes DOF valuation methods by property type. Table 2, DOF valuation methods. Tax class property type methodology for computing DOF value. 1. 3 family homes comparable sales, net income capitalization of comparable rental, cooperatives and condominiums, 11 plus units. Income. 2. Large rentals, 11 plus units, net income capitalization, gross income multiplier based on available rent. 2A, 2B small rentals, 4-10 units, L income, small cooperatives and condominiums, 2-10 gross income multiplier based on comparable. 2C. Units, rental income, cost valuation of special franchise property. 3 utilities, determined by ORPTS. 4 commercial property net income capitalization. Source, New York City Department of Finance. Presentation, New York Property Tax System Background, July 20, 2018, available at this URL. 42 NYCDEPT of Finance. Presentation, New York Property Tax System Background, July 20, 2018, available at this URL. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 27. There are multiple legal constraints that DOF faces in valuing different property types. Section 581 of the New York State Real Property Tax Law (RPTL) requires that coupes and condos be valued as if they were rental properties. This can result in 43. Undervaluation, especially for high-end parcels, due to difficulty in finding appropriate comparable rental buildings. Additionally, comparable rental buildings may have income constrained by rent stabilization laws, which further contributes to undervaluation. Most 2A, 2B small rentals are not legally required to file detailed accountings of income and expenses. Therefore, income is estimated from parcels that do file, and a multiplier is derived from typical sales within a neighborhood. The courts have found the use of anticipated future, expected income, i.e., discounted cash flow method, to value income-producing properties is speculative and have expressed a preference for the direct capitalization of current earned income. The mass appraisal DOF conducts for commercial properties is consistent with the court's preference and uses rent income to derive capitalization rates. These rates are higher than market capitalization rates utilized by single parcel appraisers and less likely to be challenged. Market capitalization rates include speculative purchases made with the intention of building conversion, renovation, and/or increases in resale value, which DOF does not incorporate into its valuations. Moreover, DOF does not receive detailed lease structure information from commercial properties, which can affect a parcel's market sale price by constraining future income. DOF derives capitalization rates for large apartment buildings in a similar manner to commercial properties. Lease structures may play a lesser role in determining a large rental building's market sale price, given the short-term nature of the leases. The anticipated stability of the income stream may be considered in deriving a capitalization rate. However, developing mass appraisal assumptions about expectations of future income increases, which are characteristic of speculative purchases involving renovations or conversions, is problematic and not favored by the courts. Step 3. Application of assessment ratios. Actual AV. The calculation of taxable value starts by multiplying assessment ratios by DOF value to obtain actual AVs. The DOF Commissioner has the discretion to set the assessment ratios within each class. 44 Between 1991 and 2007, the assessment ratio for Class 1 was 8%. In 2007, the Commissioner lowered the Class 1 ratio to 6%, and it has remained at this level. The assessment ratio for all other classes is 45%, as shown in Table 3. Step 4. Application of caps and phase-ins. Transition.
This is an important point. Right here, you can see that the Department of Finance Commissioner has the discretion to set the assessment ratio for each class. And it was actually changed from 8% in 2007, it was lowered to 6%. So that could actually happen now. We could actually lower the assessment ratio to 0.1%, like Nassau County, parts of Nassau County at least do, and it would give full assessment. If it has to be lower, we can do that too, whatever it takes to make the assessment full assessment. But it doesn't require state law. You see it right here. And the Department, the Independent Budget Office confirms that and so talks about that. Let's continue.
Step 4. Application of caps and phase-ins. Transitional and billable AV. The property tax system contains AV growth caps and
This is where it ends. At this point, we can add part 2, but I recommend everyone read the report. Go to tony.brooklyncoop.org. It's on this website. You can listen to it. It's very hard to read that PDF file or listen to that PDF file because of the way the columns work. It'll sound like gobbledygook. So that's why this exists. This is serialized so you can listen to it and have your voices heard. Please get involved. This is a once in a 40-year change, so if you don't get involved now, you can notice that there's no talk about NYU and Columbia not paying any property tax. There's no talk about tax limits. There's no talk about a 2% tax cap. There's no talk about inflation. There's no talk about also the 421A tax abatement assessment or exemption, the billions and billions of dollars that are going to that. No mention of that. So I guess this report was influenced by bodies that we don't see here. And also we want our voices heard. So please come to these commissions and make your voices heard. Because in this report, I don't see any mention of public input, right? It'd be helpful to know where they're getting these things, what their vote was, how they decided these things, and they say by consensus, what was discussed. Why don't we see these discussions? That should be public information. Isn't that part of that public meetings law? Please get involved. Come to the website and join the mailing list at tony.brooklyncoop.org. You can join easily by just going to the main page and joining the group. That's where you can get your voices heard. Please. Thank you. Peace out.